But before we get started, let me properly introduce Matt. So I'll say a bit about his background. So Matt is the founder and CEO of GiveGame, which was formerly branded DraftMates, and it's a new venture he began about a year ago after he spent 20 years of growing startups out in California. So we're very lucky to have him back in town. He originally relocated from Ohio to the Bay Area in the mid-'90s. And there he founded rentpayment.com, which is the original online rent payment service. In 2003, Rent Payment merged with Yapstone, and Matt then became the CEO. Today, Yapstone is the largest online payments platform for property managers. And I know a couple of your colleagues that you've met before were saying earlier in the back that they've been following your work since then. So he's a big deal in that industry. Let's see. Yapstone is an 11-time Inc. 5000 honoree. Also serves large online marketplaces like HomeAway. So sort of a back end for those. Very cool. Matt's a graduate of Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. We won't hold that against him, those of us from OU. And he's thrilled to be back in his hometown of Columbus. So we connected, it's been about a year ago. And so just tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial history and what brought you back here.
Sure.
Here, I'll trade you.
Okay, even better. I really don't need one, but I'll use one anyway. So thanks so much, Christy. It's really, really a pleasure to be here. Rev1 was actually one of the first firms I connected with once I knew I was coming back to Ohio. So to kind of give the shortest version I possibly can, because I could talk for hours about it. So I, after graduating from Miami, got an opportunity to work with a management consulting firm who actually was in the Brewery District when I was living here for a year in 95, 96, and got an opportunity to move to Cleveland to work with this firm for their internet practice in Cleveland, Ohio in 1996. And what it was one of their partners had a great relationship with Netscape Communications. And so that gave me the opportunity to come out to the Bay Area, commuted back and forth from Cleveland to San Francisco for about 3 years. And then in 99, the commute was killing me. I was just going back to do laundry and pay bills. And so I moved full-time to San Francisco in February 99. And less than a year after moving, came up with this idea, actually out of my Netscape experience, which was this confluence of online bill payment, credit card processing, and incentives. And back then, some of you may remember, it was when Capital One, First USA, the big credit card issuers were really taking off. And so what drove the value of their bill? The size of the ticket. What was most people's largest ticket? Their rent. And even back in 2000, San Francisco rents were even $2,000 a month back then. Now they're almost $5,000 a month. But it was one of these things where it was all about what drove the value of the service was the size of the ticket. And so rather than paying a $30 gas bill with a credit card, it was about offering a new way to pay your rent rather than just writing a check, which obviously most people had been doing to that point in time. So we started hiring a few engineers, built out this online platform, missed the VC window of the .com by about 6 months. And so after raising just myself and 2 other angels, we had enough money to get us through 2000. By early 2001, I was completely out of money. Went from 1 employee to 13 down to 1. Was running the company out of my apartment, literally, and ran across this other company called Yapstone. And they were basically doing the same thing, although they were doing it in an offline way. And so they were literally having people fill out a form in a leasing office when you go to an apartment building and faxing in their information to say, hey, I want to pay with a credit card. And it was one of these things where we didn't know how well it was going to take off. We thought landlords would pay the credit card fees. As it turns out, they wouldn't, and they still don't to this day. It's still a model predominantly where the renter pays a fee to pay with a credit card. But it was one of these things where we realized, unlike many .coms of the day, where it was either monetize eyeballs and make money on them later or no revenue at all, we didn't actually need to have many transactions to actually make a profit on every transaction to the point that we could get by on fairly low adoption. And so that was sort of what carried us through for 5+ years. And so to make a long story short, it was bootstrapped. Once Yapstone and Rent Payment, these 2 companies doing basically the same thing, came together, I served as CEO. We were bootstrapped for a full 10 years until 2010, living off of our revenues, just barely getting by. And then our big break was when we signed HomeAway, and we power all their credit, debit, and e-check processing for the US and now for Europe as well. And that's multi-billions of dollars. of processing volume every year. So went 10 years without institutional funding, raised one $50 million round in 2010, then went back, raised a little bit more money over the next 7 or 8 years. And over that time, until 2014, I served as CEO. And by the time we got to about 150 people, the day-to-day wasn't as much fun. A lot of the HR stuff, hiring, firing, constantly recruiting was taking over. I didn't get to really work on the product
Very different
anymore.
world at that point.
Yeah, it's just not as much fun. I still love the 20 to 100 probably range the most in terms of people. But anyway, so stepped down as CEO, and at that point, the company had about 150 employees doing about 100 million in revenue. Company today, and I was co-chairman for the last 4-ish years or so. Company today is about 550 employees doing about a little over 300 million in revenue. So it's still privately held. Obviously been in the fintech credit card world for about 20 years. And really the last 3 to 4 years was kind of getting ready to figure out, okay, what do I want to do next? I kind of view myself as a serial entrepreneur. I haven't worked for a big company literally since a year out of college, and so I can't imagine starting now.
Well.
So, yeah, so it's kind of like once you're a startup person, you're kind of always a startup person. And so was working on a couple of ideas, but I got this idea while I was obviously still in California. And the original idea, and I'll explain kind of the name change from what we used to be versus what we are today, and that is that the original idea was just a funner way, easier way to play fantasy sports with your friends, hence draft mates, and either doing it for bragging rights or to actually give to a nonprofit. So if there was an entry fee involved, it would be to support a nonprofit. Whoever's nonprofit benefited that scored the most points. And so think of it as with football every week, a different nonprofit could win based on playing with your friends. And that was sort of the original idea, a native app that just made it easier and cooler to play rather than losing cash 80% of the time, which any of you who have played DraftKings or FanDuel probably are familiar with that. This was a much cooler way where you had no risk of losing cash, and if money was involved, it was supporting a nonprofit. So back this time last year, I was literally going in Oakland and San Francisco, looking at office space, getting ready to raise a seed round and kind of determine what I was going to do. I had a couple guys that were kind of helping me out on a consulting basis, but I engaged this app design firm in San Francisco to build the original apps while I was still out there. And in about March or April, after just being so frustrated with how much San Francisco and the Bay Area has changed over the last 20 years. I mean, part of it was, having kids and seeing the environment that the kids were growing up in. And I wasn't even in the city. I mean, I was out in the burbs. But even though I was out in the burbs, we still couldn't even go shopping after 10 a.m. because the parking lots are full. I mean, the traffic is insane. The people are nuts.
Quality of life was
not
what you wanted.
Was not what it was even 5 years ago. And so anyway, realizing that we don't need to be here anymore. For this business in particular, I mean, it was at the time, fantasy sports, not many sports fans in the Bay Area. Engineers and VCs both are very anti-sports.
Interesting.
So, I mean, it was one of these things where it was going to be an uphill battle. I mean, even from a hiring perspective, let alone from an investor perspective, to hire out there.
Right.
And so I realized, we don't really need to be here. And so really seriously looked at, everything from Reno to Austin to Portland, Seattle, Denver, all the tech hubs of places to go, and we just came to the conclusion, it made more sense to be near family. And ironically enough, my wife's actually in the back of the room. She is a big reason why we're here because she has a cousin in New Albany. Even though I grew up in Columbus, my parents still live in Clintonville, right a block from the Cook Road Hills, the house that I grew up in. And I never imagined in a million years that I'd be moving back to Central Ohio, but she had a cousin in New Albany. She said, hey, if we were ever to move anywhere, we want to be near family. And so I was like, wow, I don't have to be the bad guy that makes my family come back to the city I grew up in.
Win-win.
And so that was when I realized, wow, this is an opportunity to go back to Columbus. And then when I started to really understand how much the startup scene has changed here, tech scene, I realized, wow, this could actually be an asset being here. And so doing that research, realized that, hey, we knew we were going to live in New Albany, but I was pretty open to working probably somewhere near downtown. That seemed to be where a lot of the startup people I was meeting were based. And started interviewing some people remotely, and by July moved out here. August 1st took up this great office space right next to Wolf Ridge Brewery near the Arena District, and it's just been phenomenal. And so
Wow. Well, I really want to get into some of the details on what you've experienced since you've been here, but I have a question.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you go through that full cycle with Yapstone, and what
Yep.
an amazing ride. And I know you'll probably have questions about that, but how did you decide what you were going to do next? I'm assuming there
Yeah.
were a lot of opportunities or things that you were
Yeah.
thinking about or people
Well,
brought to you.
I'm always thinking about like 20 things. I mean, the one thing though, and this is one thing I will tell you, having been at a company that did scale after a period of time, is that you can't, after you've done something that scales, it's really, really hard to say, you know, my next thing I want to do like a flower shop, because it'd be really cool, or like
Right.
own a bar.
It's a different,
Because sure, it'd be
different
a heck of a
ballgame.
lot of fun to own a bar, you know, and I can watch sports all day, and it's great. But you have to do something that can scale after having done something that scales, and honestly,
Why?
that eliminates. Because you just see the power of like not having to hire people to grow. I mean, like, so for that very
Right.
reason,
Instead of
I
a
could
one-to-one,
never-
it's a one.
yeah, and again, no offense to anyone who's a consultant, but I mean, I could never do that because I would always be constrained by my own hours
Right.
to grow a business. And sure, you can hire more people and grow that way, but I love ideas where you don't have to throw people at it to make it, you know,
Right.
a massive, massive big company.
And do you feel like you had to go through that process to understand it fully?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, and I could tell you, just that scale requirement eliminates probably 97% of the ideas of what you could do for your
Right,
next act.
right.
I mean, there's a lot of cool things that are meant to stay small, and this is one of the things like talking with venture capitalists all the time. You know, there's a lot of great small business ideas. They're just not necessarily venture backable.
Right. And it
because they
doesn't
don't
make them
have
good, bad. It
doesn't make
it's
it a
a
bad
different
business
type
at all.
of model.
In fact, no. In fact, it can be a local business. It can just be a business that has a really, really small addressable market.
Right.
It can just be a business that can only grow so much in revenue. It just may not be venture backable.
Yes.
It certainly could be a great lifestyle business, and it's something you really get fired up about and enjoy coming into work every day and
Right.
doing. But once you've done something, I think at scale, you are looking for things that have that kind of viral effect,
Mm-hmm.
marketplace type effect, that can really get you excited about, hey, I can build something that truly can be adopted, not just in
Right.
Columbus, but around the world.
Well, so that now I'm off script. So that really begs the question of the motivation of the entrepreneur. So what is
Yeah.
your motivation? If those are the things you're attracted
Yeah.
to, what is your have you kind of figured out in your mind what are your big motivators as a serial entrepreneur?
Well, I mean, obviously I love the idea of just building things and creating value in general. Like I want to build something that actually is helping humanity. Now,
Right.
given, you know, Yapstone and the financial success it's had, I mean, I probably was a little more interested in doing something that some would argue is a little bit more philanthropically based with
Now.
this now
Yes, that makes
than
sense.
if I would have just done the easy route, which would have been just done something else in e-commerce or credit card processing, which I can do in my sleep. I mean,
Right.
honestly, this other idea I was going to do, which I still may do after GiveGame, you know, it was the type of thing where I kind of like, you know what, that's like so easy in my own mind to me that it would just be like,
Yeah,
I can
been
do it in my
there,
sleep.
done
It wouldn't
that.
be
Yeah.
exciting enough to really do something. And that's part of what's kind of cool about what I'm doing now with this online fundraising platform is I'm not really leveraging any relationships I had. So not only have I gone full
Starting
stop
from
and given
scratch.
up all the San Francisco and the Bay Area, you know, people and companies and people that I've worked with, whether it be to join me on the team or, you know, I mean, I'm still talking to investors, but generally speaking, I'm starting all over. And I
Yes.
love that. I love that I'm starting all over.
New problems to solve.
New problems to solve, new geography in a new industry with completely different people with different, I mean, like any business, I mean, you see
Right.
similarities, but
So you're totally embracing that, right?
Oh, yeah,
That
I
it's
love it.
constantly changing, that
Yeah.
one door or one closed door may lead to another way to look at things. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about how DraftMates, now GiveGame,
yeah.
has iterated and what you
Right.
see as even
Yes.
future iterations.
Yeah, so I kind of call it multi-testing versus multitasking. I think, you know, with a startup, you know, you think you've got all the answers and you say, oh, I hit the bullseye. And I think to a certain extent, we originally thought this was either going to be for people that either liked fantasy sports, somewhat casual sports fans that just wanted to make a difference, wanted to give to a cause. The reality is there's only so many of those in the world, and there's a lot more people who want to give to causes that then it's just a matter of making sure that you're not intimidating them into thinking, oh, I have to know about sports or know about
Right.
what's going on. And so one of the things that we did with shifting from DraftMates to GiveGame is GiveGame says exactly what we are. So what we are is effectively a GoFundMe online fundraising platform with gamification, so GiveGame. The idea too being that rather than this idea of, oh, you have to play or donate every week of the football season or every week of the NBA season, when we were beta testing last fall, we said, hey, from a social media, from a trending perspective, let's just focus on the 50-ish sport and non-sport events that really get the most attention. So starting with the Super Bowl. A couple weeks ago, we had our first non-sporting event, the Academy Awards, where you could pick amongst the nominees in the top 7 categories.
Yeah. How did that go?
It went well. It went great. And what was awesome about it was we got more net new users through that experience. And these, you've got to believe, are people that maybe were either intimidated by the DraftMates, the sports connotation, or just love the Academy Awards. And so we have a big, huge contest going on right now, which is going to close from a standpoint of playing in 24 hours for March Madness. So we have a lot of nonprofits that are raising money against March Madness with a slightly different format. And we're going to do everything from the Kentucky Derby to Wimbledon to the Masters to the Tony Awards to the Bachelor, Bachelorette. I mean, there's all of these opportunities with pop culture or sporting events that already get a lot of attention, obviously on social media, for people to leverage it as a fundraising opportunity. So like our best use case, because obviously nonprofits are always looking for new ways to raise money and engage. Our best use case are what we call the cause champions. So the Pelotonia rider or the Pelotons, the team and training person, the person who has to raise $1,000 or $5,000 just to participate in their event.
Right.
Because they're asking their friends for money like 5 or 6 times awkwardly. And with this, it's like, hey, we can play March Madness together, and then we can play the Masters, and then we can play Wimbledon. It's like a new thing to talk about and play. And every time, everyone who's donating is working towards my overall goal of raising $1,500 or whatever it is. And so that's where we wanted to shed the negative connotation that came with fantasy sports and gambling. Nonprofits as well as VCs were saying smells like gambling when it wasn't.
Right.
But also this whole idea of embracing lots of non-sports pop culture events that are just another opportunity for people to tie a fundraiser to it.
Well, and I would also think with younger generations, I think there's a lot of research that shows that they want to be able to give back on a regular basis, and I'm sure that's something you're
the millennial
seeing and
is
tapping
absolutely.
into as well.
So you take, for instance, a university alumni association. So let's say they're doing an email blast for people that graduated 5 years ago and said, we're doing our capital campaign, you should be able to give $100. They wonder why their conversion rate's incredibly low. But if you said, hey, you could play a game tied to these big events and maybe give $10 4 or 5 times a year, that's something that appeals much more to millennials. Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned earlier on in this conversation that you saw a lot of opportunities in Columbus, and you even mentioned to me privately that you're having an easier time finding software engineers here than you did out west, which I think a lot of our team would be like, what? That's not what we see. So
and I get that reaction from people here all the time, too.
Tell us about that and what your experience has been since you came.
And I will draw from a specific experience I actually had with my last company. So my last company, we were in downtown San Francisco from 2003 till 2010. And I made the conscious decision. I was living in the East Bay, so about a half an hour away. And our lease was about up. We were having a heck of a time competing with the hundreds of startups in San Francisco to find talent. And so I kind of made the executive decision. I wanted to move the company to the East Bay, and so moved to the burbs. And what my thinking is rather than getting the 5 of the 100 engineers in downtown San Francisco, Oakland, I could get 8 of the 20 that were out in Walnut Creek and in the East Bay.
That didn't want to commute in.
Now, I feel like I was probably about 7 or 8 years ahead of my time, because at this point in time, they've got a phenomenal pipeline of engineers that they're hiring out there, and they've built a brand. And kind of like Columbus, they're competing with, let's say, a dozen tech companies rather than 200 in downtown San Francisco. I will also say, and I could talk philosophically about the Bay Area and cost of living and everything, but there absolutely is a day of reckoning happening. I mean, it's going to happen probably in 3 to 5 more years, but the quality of life, the necessity, it's not by choice anymore, the necessity to go farther and farther away from the city from an affordability perspective
taking away some of the
is going to take away the panache of being downtown from a company's perspective, because they're going to ultimately have to listen to the people, and the people cannot live in the city anymore. They have to live farther and farther away. And then when you dovetail quality of life, living close to where you work, I think it's actually going to force the hand of a lot of tech companies who right now have banked on being in San Francisco to establish credibility, that it actually will become an asset, particularly if they want to attract people from out of the Bay Area to work for them, to actually being farther out of the city. And it's just one of those trends that's just gotten worse and worse and worse. I mean, obviously the traffic and the cost of living is insane. I've had a couple people here in Columbus that, they were talking about taking a job in the Bay Area, and I'm like, well, first off, don't. But if you do, don't let them tell you.
Don't let me sway your decision.
Because I tell people all the time, I'm in tech and I left. I chose to leave. I mean, God forbid. I mean, I worry for the firemen, the policemen, the teachers out there that literally have to,
How do you make a
work
living?
3 jobs just to make ends meet. Whereas, my daughter's teacher here, she's 25 years old and she owns a home in Columbus. So
Very different
it's just,
world.
And that's one of those things that I think if people knew out there how Columbus is a lot closer to San Francisco than it's different, it would certainly help tremendously.
Well, let's take the talent conversation one step further, because I do think our experience has been with a lot of the entrepreneurs we work with, but they are challenged by attracting technical talent, and oftentimes you end up sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul locally, where you have some of these fast-growing companies attract a big group, and then another company comes up and they take them away. So, what advice would you give to founders who are trying to scale their company and are having a hard time with talent?
Yeah, well, so I feel like Columbus is that Walnut Creek example of, like, in the case of mobile consumer internet, I mean, there's pretty much, like, selfishly, there's us, Root Insurance, and Rap Chat. And that's it. So if you're someone coming right out of Ohio State, you want to work on mobile consumer apps, there's only so many places you can go. And so obviously you want to play to your strengths. I mean, there's people who are passionate about healthcare, passionate about insurance, and that's great. And there's obviously great startups for them to go to. But when it comes to attracting, people out of school, one of the things that I will tell people that I've found over and over again so far has been, we err on the side of hiring people that have fewer years of experience here. Even though there are plenty of people who have lots of years of experience, the necessity of getting people who are kind of wired or at least open-minded to that startup lifestyle, I think is far more important than just the fact that they've been doing coding so long effectively.
Well, then how do you, I completely agree with that in my experience working for startups, but what other things do you put in place then to help ease that transition, though, if you're earlier in your career and you're thrown into a startup?
Well, the earlier in your career you can do it, the easier it is to do. I mean, I've told people this many times. I mean, if I would have started Yapstone and done it after I was married and have kids, I probably wouldn't have done it. I mean, it's just a life stage. So if you have the freedom, the upward mobility to do it, just do it. Don't worry about when the perfect time's going to come along. It's like there's no perfect time to get a dog. You just get one. And it's kind of that same way with a startup. I mean, you just gotta take the plunge. The more horizon you have to correct if things don't go well. I'll tell you another thing that I think is also a misnomer about the Midwest that has changed, certainly from when I was growing up here too, is that like San Francisco, I think there's a lot more people that don't view it as a scarlet letter if you were a part of a startup that ends up not working out.
Right.
I still think the experience, like for instance, I mean, if I was hiring someone, I'm not as worried about the fact that the company that they came from wasn't wildly successful, unless maybe if they're in sales. Then I'd be a
You
little
learn
worried.
a lot more from a failure than you do from a success.
You absolutely do.
vouch
And so,
for that.
but I think there's still that stigma of, early in my career, I need to have this beautiful, pristine resume where I don't have anything that's not an absolute smashing success. So I want to go work at Chase or I want to work at Nationwide because I want to not just get that experience, but I want to make sure I don't have any black marks on my resume, right? But people can't be afraid of that because, I mean, I've met some folks who haven't had startups that necessarily ended up having a great outcome, and in my mind, I don't see any issue with that. And I would much rather take that person who's done 2 or 3 of those, who knows what the lifestyle is, knows that they have to pick up and do whatever it takes. There's no clear job description. You just have to do whatever you have to do. I would much rather take someone like that than somebody who says, well, look at all these high-profile companies that I've been at, and now I kind of think I want to try this thing because I'm at a point in my life, I've saved some money, and I can take a little more risk by trying a startup. I mean, it's harder for those kinds of people
later.
to do it later, right? So I always encourage people, particularly, either kids coming right out of Ohio State here or other schools, always do it as early in your career as you possibly can. This whole idea of you have to pay your dues and do your 2-year tour of duty and management consultancy or at a bank, and only then will people take you seriously. I don't believe it's true anymore.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about students, because I know you're really passionate about entrepreneurship and starting young and students and how to foster that. So, Columbus is really proud to have some of the largest population of universities here and students coming out of that. But I think it can be difficult to keep those graduates around. A good example, my nephew is getting ready to graduate honors engineering at Ohio State. He has a job waiting for him at Google in New York, and of course I want him to stay here.
Sure.
And so, what do you think we can do, or what would advice be to those high potential students to stick around and help our economy locally?
Well, I'll tell you, I think Columbus probably doesn't do enough to tout how much it has changed. So I think there's kind of two different audiences that you're really talking about. So you're talking about the people that may not have gone to Ohio State but have gone to other schools, maybe in the Midwest already, so they already kind of know what it's like. But I don't think people realize that Columbus is not just in the same state as Cleveland and Cincinnati. I think people don't really appreciate how different this city truly is. I mean, I've lived in kind of all three, because I went to school in Oxford, lived in Cleveland for 3.5 years, and Columbus, I feel, couldn't be any more different. I mean, I think Columbus is almost like a close second to Chicago right now, rather than being in the conversation of Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, like it's been for years, right? So I think Columbus has to do more to really tout the impact that, having VC firms, I mean, like you guys and Drive and NCT and guys like that really, really are making a difference and are funding unicorns here in Columbus that are not the case in Cincinnati, Cleveland. Because there's plenty of people that go to these massive Midwest schools that I don't think really appreciate what makes Columbus special. And then, it's funny, I was talking with one of the Venture Ohio guys that works on, attracting businesses here. And, one of the points that he told me I thought was really interesting was he said part of the problem with Columbus is that where the airport is, people will go straight from the airport, right, to the convention center and back. And even though, the Arena District is what it is and the Short North is what it is,
you never get to see that.
They don't get to really see everything Columbus has going for it. So whether if you're a suburbs person and you never get a chance to go so far as Dublin, or whether you're just a downtown person, there's more the city could do to really, really get the word out about why it's not just another Cincinnati or Cleveland. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing, and this is more talking to the boomerangs like me's of the world, is it's kind of funny. I don't know if you guys heard about this, but maybe about 5, 6, 7 years ago, the city of Detroit did a massive advertising campaign where they were putting billboards up in Silicon Valley on Highway 101, and it was saying, here's what you can buy a house for, and this is when Quicken Loans was really, really taking off, and they were saying, we're gonna build a huge engineering center in Detroit. And literally, it wasn't like, okay, people that are born and raised in California is telling them about Detroit. They were calling out all the people that grew up in Detroit that live in the Bay Area that were working for these tech companies. And it actually was a pretty successful campaign.
Interesting.
And so you have these people that are like, my gosh, I'm throwing away $5,000 a month in rent. Maybe I should give Detroit a second look. I don't know if Columbus necessarily needs to do that. Like,
they actually did do that. They picked like 10 or 15, if you're anybody here from Experience Columbus, cities where they were putting up ads on buses about why come to Columbus.
But
it's a pricey proposition to go do that,
it's super pricey. But I'm telling you, I think to the extent that you could kind of shrink wrap the story of why Columbus isn't the Columbus of 1995 or 2000 now, and how
maybe that should be your next business.
That might be exactly.
Cracking that nut. Right?
But I mean, telling that story in a time when the affordability is an absolute disaster in the Bay Area. I met more than a few Midwest transplants, and so many of them justify it, obviously with the weather and the this, the that, and I always tell people out there, so the mountains and the beach, how many days a year do you actually enjoy it?
Right.
It's the idea of knowing it's there, but it's
You're
not
so
something
busy that you never make it around.
They're all working, 70 hours a week building
the last couple of weeks. That part of the story is not resonating with me.
I know.
I just need a vacation.
Yeah.
Well,
Weather's very overrated, though, I will say.
Yeah, that's probably right. Well, I know we want to get to Q&A soon, but let's talk about more specifically about raising capital, right?
Yes,
So
okay.
I think that continues to be one of the challenges in the Midwest. It's something that we're trying to help, mitigate the gap and overcome every day. What has been your experience and sort of what is your thinking on how to best tackle that?
Yeah, so it's not easy. I mean, and honestly, I think it's a little harder than I thought it was going to be. I will say, and I've talked to some entrepreneurs, one of which did a consumer play in Cincinnati that recently had to shut its doors, had a number of users, and I mean, he just got tired of going back to the well for, like $500,000 every year. And it was one of these things where he just didn't have relationships in the Bay Area. And he just said, well, the problem with Cincinnati, unlike Columbus, where there's a lot more layers of size companies you can work at, in Cincinnati, it's like, he's like, if I don't start another company from scratch again, I have to go work at Procter & Gamble.
There's no place
There's
to
no
go.
in between.
Yeah.
And he just didn't want to imagine doing that. So he actually was looking at leaving and going to California, which
Did you tell him to come up here?
I did. I told him there's a lot going on, but no, but it's just, it is hard. I will say, as an entrepreneur, you absolutely have to make the effort to go out to other parts of the country. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Bay Area. The Bay Area still is 80 to 90% of the investors,
Where
right?
the money goes,
but you've
yes.
got to go out there and pitch those guys. I will say that we haven't completely gotten to 2019 in terms of some VCs that still give me some grief. I mean, there's people that I was pitching 2 weeks ago. I'm raising right now a $2 to $3 million round of capital. And there's still a couple that gave me a hard time about it. We just can't get over being Columbus. Now, that may be code for we don't want to have to come out there for a board meeting, or
Right.
it's getting on a plane is a pain or whatever. But explain to them, hey, your money goes twice as far. You're actually de-risking all these Bay Area businesses with people that can't afford to live there, and they're trying to hire headcount out there. So it's reminding them of why the Midwest has a lot of advantages. There's still some that are kind of reticent to embracing that, but I do think it's absolutely necessary. So any entrepreneur who limits the scope of location, geographies that they go to only like Columbus, Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, or even just New York or Boston, I think you need to make the effort to make some connections out in the West Coast. And if nothing else, what you're going to find is you're going to find a different mentality in terms of the way they view company stage, as far as how much money you're raising, how far along you ought to be. I mean, it isn't surprising, but I mean, people here do tend to be more conservative in terms of the stage that your company, the product has to be at. Part of that, I think, is due to lack of competition, right? So
Right.
just like if you're a startup and you have 100 startups competing with you for talent, if you're a VC and you have 100 VCs competing with you for deals, that pushes prices up. And you've got early stage guys that 5 years ago would be writing, like an angel was $100K to $250K check, and now angels are $500K to $1 million, and it's pushed the Series A guys up to like $3 to $7 million for seed deals. Whereas here, I mean, a seed deal could still be hundreds of thousands of dollars rather than millions of dollars. So it varies regionally, and there's definitely a different expectation for how far along you are. Now, that's not all bad. It just means that you have to have met more milestones before you do raise money. And I think in a perfect world, I mean, I'm in the middle of it right now. In a perfect world, I would raise probably about a third to a half from Midwest-based VCs, but I probably know in my heart of hearts at least half I'll probably raise in the Bay Area still.
Right.
Yeah, because it's just the numbers. I mean, there's obviously
Right.
hundreds and hundreds
Follow
of
the
funds
money.
out there.
Well, can we talk home-life balance for a moment?
Sure.
Because I know you mentioned, and I met your wife earlier, she's
Yeah.
rolling her eyes, but it can be, those of us have done many startups,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're doing it again. It can be very lonely, it can be challenging, it can be stressful on the
Yeah.
family. So how do you think about that, and how have you helped to ensure that you have that balance?
Well, yeah, I mean, and in my last company, I mean, my wife was literally doing customer service, answering the phone, taking out the trash early on. Just whatever needed to be done. I mean, it was a family affair, but no. And I'll tell you, I mean, the biggest adjustment actually now, and this is more a reflection of kind of getting ready to do my next thing. I was kind of not in a structured office environment for the last 3.5 years I was in California. So it was more my kids, actually. My kids just expecting that I'm around, that I'm always home.
No.
They're going to see me all the time, whatever. And now, I mean, I have to race back to New Albany to catch, like, my 13-year-old had a singing thing at the McCoy Center last night, and I had to race back to get back for that. But it's just, I don't know. I'm not one of these people that is life-work balance means that you just completely shut it off. Like I even tell even
It's
my
merged.
own guys, It's merged.
Kind of merged.
Yeah, it does. It kind of, one kind of rolls into the other one. Like I'll tell people all the time, it's not about like being on email 5 hours on the weekend straight, but it makes a lot of sense to check your email 5 times for 5 minutes to make sure the world didn't blow up, right? And sometimes people forget about that stuff.
Stay
Some people
connected.
feel like I have to shut it off the moment I go home from work, and I'm shutting it off until I have to turn it back on, and that's not the right mentality either. So I always look at it in terms of being efficient with your time. There are plenty of moments when you can just verify that, hey, there's something that I could either respond to right away that I can do even on a Saturday or Sunday just because I have a free minute. It doesn't mean that I'm ignoring my family. It just means that for those 5 minutes, my family didn't have to be involved in everything I'm doing every minute of the day, even on the weekend. So I think there's a healthy way that those two worlds, one doesn't have to end and the other one has to start. And I do believe there are some people that do still have that mentality. Like that's one of those things where, not that I want to say it's like Silicon Valley sensibility, but there are ways to manage it that it should not have a material negative effect on your family, but still feel like you're there for them when you need to. You still have the open door policy. Like right now, like we don't have like a vacation policy, so we've kind of adopted the when people need to go somewhere, they just go. Right. It's not like, I've accrued 4.3 vacation days.
Right.
So
more flexible.
In lieu of free lunch and free dinner and blue M&Ms, we have unlimited
green
vacation,
M&Ms.
I guess. Yeah. So no, I mean, we're not adopting all of that stuff from the Bay Area. But it's just, you need to be flexible. I mean, life happens when it happens, and I think you just have to be flexible to it.
Oh, that's good, thank you. And I have a ton more questions about culture and hiring and that, but I'm gonna just take a pause for a minute because I really want to open it up to questions from the audience, and I think Heather's gonna be coming around with a microphone. So if you have a question, just put your hand up or else I'll just keep asking things. I know you have questions.
No questions. Oh, come on. Wow. Okay.
Here, we have
There
one
go.
over here.
Andrew.
Hold on.
It's a friendly
Yeah,
question.
state your
It's a
name.
friendly question.
State your name,
That's what you
please,
think.
first.
Andrew Daniels. I'm work here at Rev1 and work with Matt. Just a question. So you mentioned a little bit earlier about Yapstone, and before that, you went from 1 employee to 13 employees back to 1.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that experience, and then how has that helped you now? As you start your plan to scale.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was out of necessity. I mean, I had to lay people off. I was out of money. I'd done the classic, put payroll on credit cards. I mean, all the stories back then. I mean, in a lot of ways, I was lucky in that I found a business partner he's now the CEO of Yapstone. And it was one of these things where he said, hey, I can keep the lights on, but I want someone to run the day-to-day. So it was a nice complementary kind of skills match. But no, yeah, I mean, you just kind of have to do whatever you have to do. I mean, I felt at the time that from an intellectual property perspective, that what I had built was ultimately going to get some value, and if I just hung on long enough, it would ultimately get some kind of value from that. But when I realized, hey, I could actually still realize this opportunity to build this business, to realize this opportunity, I just ran out of time from the VC window perspective. That's what you really got to hang in there for. And that's one of those things that I mean, I've talked to some schools and some other things just that talk about, the entrepreneurial journey or whatever. And I'm telling you, this is one of those things where in 10 years, obviously, without institutional funding is a big part of it, but you've just got to will it, It's just kind of like a whatever it takes, and you just kind of do what you got to do. There's also a lot to be said, that whole phrase, hanging around the hoop. I mean, just every day that you're not dead, you're still alive. And there's just a lot to be said by as long as there's not something materially that either is a reason why you should be doing something else that you think you're either more passionate about or you need to because you really have to make an income or whatever it is, you've just got to keep seeing it through as long as the metrics aren't going bad. And so there's that aspect of just having the will, having the determination to just kind of gut it out, obviously through some pretty lean times. Another comment I'll make, and this was definitely more the case in the first .com than it was in the second .com, is that if we did raise money and we did catch the venture capital window, I'm about 99% sure it would have blown up, and I would have been one of the 99 out of 100 companies that turned
Why
out
is
the lights.
that?
And the reason is because you either know how to spend money or you know how to make money. And rarely can an individual flip a switch and go from one to the other. And that's something that I have seen time and time and time again. I've seen it with the entrepreneurs who started businesses, everything from the web vans of the world that blew up and the pets.com to a whole variety of businesses that had so much pressure from their VCs to spend money that they got way out over their skis in hiring and they completely had uncontrollable burn rate. And when it came time to, okay, we have this much runway, now we're going to get to break even and then we're going to squeak out a profit, they still figured out ways to lose money in the spirit of, we're growing revenue
Showing
faster to
growth.
justify that. In fact, I will tell you this, and this is a funny story, but I was at a conference and there was a VC panel, and this was not an entrepreneur, this was a VC who had the audacity to say this, and I use this example all the time. And this was a guy, he was obviously talking to a group of San Francisco-based tech startups, and he said, you know what, if I were you, I would lose money as long as humanly possible, because the moment you break even or make money, they have to start valuing you on traditional metrics. And as long as you lose money, you can have whatever artificially inflated value, whether it's growing the number of users or top line users without any revenue or whatever it is. But he was extolling the fact to lose money as long as you can. Now, hopefully a strategic takes you out or something. But the moment you break even, now you've just gotten your valuation ratcheted down because they can use traditional metrics to value it. And so that's a VC. That's not even a delusional entrepreneur who thinks, oh, my business is worth $100 million.
But it speaks to that mentality that you lived in.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so I had Mr. Parker.
We've got a question.
Oh, okay. We'll go here and then we'll go there. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. My name's Scott Gillig. I consult with entrepreneurs across Central Ohio for my company. And I just think you'll have an interesting perspective, being that you've scaled to size and actually across generations. So you had a new generation of employees had come in.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, one of the biggest challenges I see out here is retaining and attracting the top talent. Is there anything that you could pinpoint that perhaps you've discovered over the years that have really made a difference for the top talent in the fields that you look for?
So are you talking about people that already live out here to attract them to another company, or are you talking more about pulling people from other cities?
Well, whether it's pulling them in for other cities or pulling them right out of the university themselves,
I
think that it's
So
a bit of a
what's the value
challenge.
proposition?
Right. What are some of the things your
how do
company's
you-
done?
And again, the Bay Area, I didn't have to do this as much because there was hundreds of startups that were all feasting on the same finite number of computer science grads from Stanford and Cal. So, that's why they were convincing them to drop out as sophomores, because there's, hundreds of companies and there's only 100 absolute, computer science kids that were, they were trying to get. Out there, it's not a big deal of, okay, I can just go to a startup. The problem there is the average tenure for engineers in the Bay Area is about 8 months. It's even lower than that. It's about 6 months in San Francisco. And so there's no loyalty. There is no, I can go to a meetup and I'm going to make 25,000, 50,000 more across the street, and people hop repeatedly. And honestly, it's not even like a generational demographics thing. It is just, if you have that
Across
skill
the
and you're
board.
that much in demand, you just do whatever you have to do. And this is where the cost of living being totally out of control plays into it. People make a lot of decisions because how high the cost of living is, that maybe if they were in Columbus, they wouldn't have to make that financial choice of leaving the company that they're at, kind of unnaturally. Even if their company's doing well, if I can make more money across the street, I just do it because my rent's $5,000 a month. So one of the things I love about being out here is I never have conversations with people about money. Everyone that you talk to in the Bay Area, it's like it comes up in every conversation, dinner conversation, coffee conversation. It's just people are constantly obsessing about how expensive everything is. And unfortunately, that goes into their professional lives. And I think reminding people that you can have your cake and eat it too. The quality of life, everything's 5 minutes away here. It's just easy. You don't have that burning midnight oil expectation in order to be successful. People understand here that work-life balance just like they do in the Bay Area. It's just that the days of, unless you're an investment banker and you worked 100 hours a week, and that's how it has to be. I don't think people realize that, hey, you don't have to live that life. And people can do that for a while. They get burned out after a period of time. But I think it's extolling the virtues of everything that makes Columbus attractive in terms of the diversity of places you can live. The ease of just the day-to-day is so easy. And I think that really is going to resonate with obviously anyone from the Bay Area, anyone from like the DC area, the New York, Boston area. Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I love about living in New Albany, and I never really appreciated this until we got there, was that it is absolutely a melting pot of transplants. I can literally count on one hand how many people I've met in New Albany that grew up in Columbus. I love the fact that they're from California, New York, Florida, Texas, a lot of people in the retail industry because the L Brand's influence and stuff. But these are people who have lived in these amazing cities around the country.
Lots of experiences
I played
to
poker
share.
with a group of 6 guys. I was the only one of 6 that hadn't lived in Manhattan at some point in my
Right.
life. I mean, unbelievable. And so these are people who have lived in these cities and they know how good it is here to say, I'm choosing to stay here because I've lived in New York and Dallas and, in these other cities, and I can tell you why they're inferior to the experience that I have here.
It's interesting you say that. I've had that similar experience up in my neck of the woods where you've had a lot of people come through the Scotts or the Hondas or the Cardinals, and
Yep.
they've been on rotations, and when
Yep.
they land here, they pretty much tell their superior that this is it. You're
Right.
gonna have to take me out of the
Right.
rotation or else I'm leaving.
Yep.
So there's definitely assets here.
Yep.
We'll go over here. And then
Hi, thank you. I'm Carla Ashton. Just as a follow-up to his question, in your time here, are you finding the employees you have here are more loyal?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure, yeah.
It's a different-
And it's a
especially those in the
totally-
room right now.
Yeah. No, it's a total,
No,
yeah,
we're
exactly.
good people here.
Yeah.
Okay, so my second question,
Yeah.
real briefly, is
doubt.
I'm curious from a marketing perspective.
Okay.
The fundraising side now of your product,
Yes.
were you driven to do that with the interest of gaining more customers because you thought it would resonate?
Sort of. Probably not as much as a traditional startup founder would. I mean, I was doing it because I kind of felt like I'm going to build this platform. All these nonprofits can use it. All these cause champions can use it. And it's a way for them to raise money and engage with their donors.
So the fundraising was secondary.
The secondary was kind of secondary.
And
so,
then my other question real quick
Yeah.
is, so because you're in it to make money, so
Ultimately, right.
what percent
Yeah.
goes to the nonprofit?
90%.
90%.
90%, yeah. So 10% inclusive of the credit card fees. So we pay all the credit card
Okay.
fees, and 90% goes to nonprofit. No setup, no monthly.
Is there a charge to play?
No. So when you make a donation, so there's a suggested donation. Let's say each contest is $10, $25, whatever it is. You can still change that amount, and many people actually give more. So it's just designed as like a single entry kind of thing. And then whatever amount goes to nonprofit, they get 90% of. One of the benefits is we actually provide for people that don't opt out the first and last name and email addresses to the nonprofit of the donors who actually participate in that contest. And that's actually one of the benefits of going through Cause Champions, where you're getting the benefit of somebody's 300 social media contacts, is it's actually bringing in net new donors that have never given to that cause before. Because most people, if you think about like with GoFundMe, they're not doing it to support the cause, like maybe cancer research, obviously I want to do something about it, but they're doing it because they want to support their friend. So it's kind of like what the cause is kind of secondary to them wanting to ultimately support whoever's raising the money. And what's great for the nonprofit, though, is that that's actually bringing in net new donors that are not just hitting their same email database of donors that have always given for years. Yeah.
Another question.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here today. Have you done any angel investing outside of investing in your own
I
businesses?
have a little bit. Yeah, I have. And I'll tell you, one of my VC buddies, I do raise about $500,000 in a convertible note from a San Francisco-based VC buddy of mine. And I tease him and I said, I'm going to be like your deal flow for all these great Central Ohio companies that, don't have a lot of, San Francisco-based relationships. But yeah, I have. I've been doing a little bit. One of the great things, and this is another thing I will say is an enormous benefit to Columbus over San Francisco from a startup entrepreneur's perspective is, I got connected to about 3 people who connected me to about 25 more people. And if they're not the guy, they know the perfect guy for about anything. And that mentality of a rising tide raises all boats is absolutely 100% true here. Whereas when you're poaching people and it's 8-month average tenure at other startups in the Bay Area, in order for me to win, you have to lose. And that really is the mentality out there. You will not get support from people unless how am I going to benefit? Am I going to make money on this? It's like, how am I going to get some benefit out of doing this for you? Whereas here, I feel like anyone will do anything for anybody, anytime. And
There does seem to be that feeling of wanting to support each other and
Yeah.
connect. And
Okay,
Parker may know some angel investors.
Yes, yeah. No, I do some
I
stuff,
think
yeah.
we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Last one, no pressure.
And if there isn't one, I have a bunch, so I'll just have to pick one.
All right.
You know you have a burning question.
No.
No?
Go ahead.
Well, so how do you think about culture and instilling the kind of culture of the kind of companies you want to grow at the earliest stages of your business?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to keep it fun. I mean, one of the things that's great about just the very nature of what we do is it's very much a mission-driven thing. I mean, we are a for-profit, but supports nonprofits. So if we raise $100 million for 501c3 nonprofits, I mean, that is 100%
So that's
correlated
giving
with our
back
revenue.
is built into your business.
It's built into our business, right? So this whole idea of having fun with the gamification of giving. So if we're successful giving nonprofits, it definitely makes it easier to recruit. I mean, I would say it's definitely the harder thing for me is to find the people that have either been at startups and have that acceptance of the lifestyle
Right.
than it is to find people that want to work with us. I mean, I literally grabbed a drink with a guy yesterday afternoon who's the CFO of another pretty big startup, and I'm like, man, I'm at least a year away from needing you. And he so wants to work with us. Like, he's like, anyway, if I can just work part-time or do something, because he just loves what we're doing. And it's just like, it's not hard to attract people for the very nature of what we do. I think if you don't get excited getting up in the morning, whether you're an insurance guy or healthcare or online e-commerce guy like me, if you're not excited about it, then that energy isn't gonna, you're obviously the people in the office they're gonna feed off of your energy. So
Right.
you've got to be excited about what you do every day.
That's really good. I have one more thing. What can this audience do to support the growth of GiveGame?
Okay, well, the number one thing you can do, because you've got literally 24 hours, there's still a few nonprofits setting up campaigns, although they only have 24 hours. But if you go to GiveGame.com, I was going to say, I don't know if you have it up on the browser there. But anyway, if you go to GiveGame.com or actually app.givegame has a list of all of our contests. We have a whole variety of nonprofits that are raising money tied to
anyone
March
can
Madness.
join those?
Anybody can join those, yeah.
Okay.
So any donor, it's open to anyone. These are public contests.
How many people have a bracket set up already? So the majority of you don't. So
Yes.
you could go get in
and this is way simpler than brackets. So rather than filling out a whole bracket, the idea is you just pick one of the 1 seeds, one of the 2 seeds, one of the 3 seeds, one of the 4 seeds. So you basically are making 16 total choices, and every time the team you picked wins a game, you get points. So it's much simpler, and even if you have no attention span or don't care about basketball, there's an auto pick capability where in a second you can generate a lineup, and it immediately takes you into making your donation. So it's a lot of fun.
Very good. All right. Well, help me in thanking Matt for coming today, and thank you all.